What is up, painters, gainers, and re-explainers? Thanks for sitting down at the messy desk with me this week. Today, first of all, just want to congratulate my boys, the beautiful boys in the black and orange, for getting to the postseason, for not giving it up to the Dodgers. Maybe we'll give it up to the Dodgers and the DS, but hey, for now, baby, we're in it. The postseason. We won the West, yada yada. We're all very excited about it. I look like a mascot, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today. Today, what I'm here to talk about is actually something I've already talked about before on this channel about a year ago, and that is parts on the OCTATRACK. Consistently in my lessons with students, the first question I ask when trying to evaluate where someone is with the OCTATRACK is, do you know what parts do? And often the answer is no. I would say 90% of the time, the answer is no. And I get that because it took me years to bother to learn what parts are, because in the manual, it's confusing as hell and it's kind of alienating. And I just want to know how to use the device. I'll worry about whatever the hell parts are later. Now, a year ago, I kind of went into what parts are sort of in a stream of consciousness as I learned what it was. And I didn't really have a great grasp on it. And I don't think I explained it super well. I think that I get the point across and it's pretty clear what they are, but I've sort of developed a way over the course of many lessons of explaining what parts are to students in a really concise way. And so that's what I want to do here today, and then just kind of give you a really quick example of a way to use parts. It is only one way to use them. There's a lot of different ways that you can use them, which I kind of go over loosely in the parts video, which I'll put whichever way it goes. I think it's this way, right? Because it's going to end up here. I don't know. Anyway, here or here. Check it out. So yeah, let's talk about it. The main confusion point for people is what is in a part and what is in a pattern. That is what trips people up the most. And for a while, I would kind of just list the things, but I don't think that's very helpful because just remembering what a long list is going to take you a lot of time. A way that I think is a lot better to kind of mentally ingrain into yourself what is in a part is this simple memory device, which is, if it's on the screen, it's in a part. It's really that simple. If you want to, between patterns, change samples, change effects on those samples, change parameters that are on those samples, if you want to change the machine type to something else, you need... No, it's cool. No, I'm not doing anything. Do you want to... Okay. Yeah, if you want to change any of those parameters between patterns and you don't want that to fuck up your previous pattern, then you need to change a part. So that's not that hard to remember, right? If you're going between patterns and you want to change any of these things, look at the screen. If it is on the screen there, it is contained in a part, and that is what is going to be affected if you change it. So how do you change parts and how do they relate to patterns? That's the second big question. It's really helpful, I think, to try to conceptualize this in terms of like programming or even modular synthesis, if this is something that you do. Think of parts as nodes, and they are nodes that are sitting there that are waiting for something to be plugged into them. And what you're plugging into them is patterns. So pattern 1 here is assigned to part 1. AO1 is assigned to part 1. Okay. At any point, I can come over to my parts menu here. There's a bug in my face. And swap over to part 2. Fantastic. What does that mean practically? What it means is, instead of my pattern, which is just steps, just sequencer data, that's all it is for the most part. Sequencer data, sample locks, and parameter locks, though it's kind of misleading in that regard, and I'll explain that in a minute. I'm sending that data to this node of information. What information does this hold? It holds everything that's on the screen. It holds your machine type, your effects types, your parameters, the way that you have them kind of dialed in, though the locks are being held in your sequencer, which again, we'll get to in a minute, your effects assignments, all that shit. So think of patterns as raw information, on-off signals, and like play this note kind of thing. And the part is, okay, how do I interpret all that? How do I spit that out? Think of patterns as MIDI notes and your parts as plugins and like audio effects chains. Hopefully that makes sense. And I know I mentioned that patterns contain parameter locks, and that I said that that's kind of misleading. So let's address that really quick. So this is something that I actually think is a really cool strength of the OCTATRACK. I don't know if I've talked about this on video before, but if I hold this here and I lock something to it on the filter, very fun. Okay, this pattern is now holding that parameter lock. So if I copy this pattern over, it will maintain this lock. But what it is locking is not, hey, there's a filter here, and these are these settings. What it's locking is, hey, here are these settings, and whatever effect is there, that is what is going to be changed about that effect. To illustrate this, if I change this to a chorus, let's say, and I hold my parameter lock down, you can see these quadrants are still being changed. They're still being locked to the exact same values that they were, roughly anyway, whatever the relative value is, on the filter. It's just quadrants that are being held here. So when I tell you that patterns hold parameter locks, they do, but there's a little bit more to the story there. And I think that knowing that can actually be a strength, because at first it might seem kind of wonky and kind of confusing, but if you think about it, all these locks here, all you have to do is change some effects, and who knows what your track will sound like. It could totally revolutionize, something that you have going on in your track. It could totally give you a jumping off point. I'm a huge fan of that, right? Starting with kind of a simple, easy point, and then just sort of randomizing shit to see, I don't know, is this anything? Is this anything? I don't know. And so, yeah, I highly recommend trying that. It's just a little note about parameter locks being carried over. Sample locks are just, they're locked in. If you lock a sample here, if I come here and I lock it to this and I change parts and switch patterns, it's always going to be that. That's always going to carry over. So really useful. Okay, I've been talking a lot, very fast, and I've been trying to cover it all very quickly because my parts video from a year ago was very disheveled. There's a lot of stuff going on there. A lot of rants about Elon Musk and Cybertrucks and things going into certain places. And we love that. I know you love it. I loved it. But it might not be the most helpful if you're really struggling with what parts are. Because I was also struggling with what parts were. I didn't really understand. But now I've explained it 60 times, and I use them constantly, and it's been a year. So I'm hoping that this explanation will be a little more concise and a little more helpful. So that's kind of it. That's kind of the explanation. Let's just go into a little bit of how I'm using parts very simply in this project to kind of illustrate my point a little bit. So if you watched last week's video, which was about using the crossfader for B sections, which I'll put up here, you can look and see here on this scene. And then this scene. We have a B section, right? We have a B section on scene B. Here is our home base. And here is a B section. We have a hi-hat being unmuted. We got some bass stuff going on. We have the tremolo. I cover all of this in that video with a different project. So that's great. How am I using parts here? Well, again, I took this very simply, and what I did was I copied part 1 onto part 2, then made a second pattern, copied the pattern over, assigned pattern 2 to part 2. So at this point, everything is the same, right? I have copied part 1 onto part 2, so those nodes are exactly the same. I have copied pattern 1 to pattern 2. The raw data, the on-off signals, the parameter locks that are really just kind of informational quadrant locks, all that's the same. So between the two, it's the exact same thing. And now I can kind of have a jumping off point. I recommend you do this with parts. Starting from scratch is annoying. Think of it as in a DAW. If you copied and pasted a section for your next section of your song, remove some elements, put some new stuff in, that's probably what you would do. You probably wouldn't say, okay, time for part 2 of my song, time to start completely from scratch and open new tracks. Probably not. So I've done that here. And what I changed was fairly simple. I just changed my master effects to a lo-fi and a delay. I changed this second effect here to a chorus from, I think it was, I don't know, a lo-fi or something. I changed an effect here to a comb filter, and I've just modulated that on the scenes. So it sounds like this. And you can hear the comb filter kind of rising up there. It was hard to get a hold of. And so that's it. So I can swap to this. Then I can have pattern 1 come back. And I can know that when I switch here, now we're back to pattern 1, part 1. Now, if I was smarter, I would have made that transition perfect, but let's just roll with it. This is a high pass. Just kidding, it wasn't a high pass. This project is 3 years old. Great. So that's it. Between those two parts, I just changed a bunch of effects, some of the locks on those effects. If I had wanted to, I could have changed some samples between the two. Like if I come here, let's say I have a through machine here. Don't really need that. Let's say I make it a flex machine and I put in this sample here, and that's great. And now it's here. If I go back to pattern 1, you can see it goes back to a through machine. Not ruin anything there. So that's parts. That's how you use parts. At least that's one way to use them. And the easy way to remember what is it a part and what you need to do between parts is it on the screen? Is it a machine type? Is it an effect? Is it set parameters here? Is it samples? I think I already said that, maybe not. All of that's on the screen. And then the last thing to know about parts is that they have new scenes in them. So it's not obvious here because I just copied parts over. But if I come here, let's say scene 14, and let's say I just clear those, right? I'm gonna go back to pattern 1, part 1. They're still there. Pattern 2, part 2. They're gone. That's really useful because if you have all these new effects, you're going to want new scenes to modulate them differently, right? Because what you use for a chorus is not going to be what you want to use for a filter or for a delay, etc., etc., especially if you're introducing new samples, stuff like that. I kind of covered this in my last video, but I hope this is helpful. I hope this is useful. And I guess before I go, I will leave you with one last note that I think is really important and also a big reason you should copy parts to each other before you make changes. Volume and gain staging is really tough on the OCTATRACK. We have a master level here. We have a volume here. Some effects allow you to distort and add additional volume. There's a master volume here. All these things, while simple relatively, can kind of compound on each other and cause you problems when you're changing between patterns. Because if I come to a new pattern here, pattern 3, and I open part 3, all of these levels are exactly the same. Right? And if I start working from here, the volume of this pattern is going to be vastly different than the volume of this pattern. And that goes along with, volume here, effects volume, all that. So you really mitigate a lot of potential volume and gain staging issues if you just copy parts. Sometimes it can be a little time consuming having to clear out different stuff and, put in all your new things. But most of the time, I find that it's a huge time saver and very, very helpful. So that's it. That's all I got for you. If you like this project, if the song is interesting to you, if you wonder kind of what I'm doing with some of these scenes over here and the performance in the beginning, you can actually get this project file. I would say for free, but it's not for free. You have to pay me money because that's just the way of the world, isn't it? If you support me on Patreon at $5 or above, you get all my project files from my OCTATRACK, which I think is maybe cool. Maybe it's not. I don't know. Haven't really gotten feedback on it, but I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep putting them up there, and I hope people will use them and enjoy them and make some remixes. I don't know. So if you want to kind of get a closer look at what's going on here, check out my Patreon. We got a lot of really cool stuff down there. A lot of nice people and me. There's more of me. I don't know why any sane person would want that, but a certain number of them do. So your mileage may vary. I'm going to stop talking now. It's really hot in this jersey, and I have to go back to work. I'm filming this on my lunch. So, without any further wasting of your time, I want to thank you so much for watching this week. You could have sat down with anybody on the whole gosh dang internet, and for some reason, you sat down with me, who still has a hot sauce packet here, like 5 episodes later. And I really appreciate that. That's super sick. Thank you so much. I will be back next week with a new video. If you're wondering why this isn't about the M8, I don't have the M8 anymore. I yeeted it the fuck out of my house, and I will talk about that. Maybe with Octomom next week. I hope you have a fantastic week in the meantime, but for now, I gotta go answer some calls about synthesizers. So, I'm Daniel, this is The Messy Desk, and I love you more than I love developing and learning and being able to hopefully teach something a little bit better, even if I had to sacrifice some more great Elon Musk goofs. I'll see you next week.